My grandfather fought in World War II. He fought in
Yeah,
the
worst
Asian
mechanic
theater.
the Luftwaffe ever had.
Well, I'm not German, okay? He was Italian. But
Listen,
it just seemed
I
I'm
think
skeptical.
okay,
I'm skeptical.
my running theory was that dinosaurs were they were created to sell children's toys. Okay,
I mean, I guess it's only fair to let you go first then, since you've never been on the show. We're talking about Ukraine, Russia, just however you want to take it, really. I'd seen you guys kind of had a dialogue back and forth through your public statements, I guess, and that's kind of how I picked up on this debate. It wasn't really my idea, right? And so, although I love hosting it, don't get me wrong, but that's kind of how this happened. So I'll just let you go first and openings, 10 minutes max, kind of, and then just kind of a free flowing discussion, however it goes after that. So that's the kill stream way. So I'll let you go first. You can introduce yourself as well at the start if you'd like to.
appreciate it. So yeah, my name's Connor. I run a YouTube channel named Counterpoints. I identify as centrist, center right depending on the day. Compared to most people on Twitch, I'm pretty much a groiper. Compared to most groipers, I'm pretty much a commie. So that kind of tells you where I'm at. I do identify with the term Burkean conservative, which just basically means that I'm trying to identify the part of society or the parts of society that are worthy of preserving, and then trying to let go of the parts of society that are not worth preserving. And what this boils down to for me, I actually wouldn't mind tangenting wherever we go naturally. I don't have to stick just with Ukraine and Russia, but I would rather broad stroke it rather than being autistic about like very specific dates or events or treaties or this, that, the other, or somebody kind of, violating this or that. We can get into that if you want to. But basically, my broad strokes is the United States is at the head of a $65 trillion global hegemon, and it is globo homo, to put it either negatively or positively. Globalist meaning that it's an international project involving many countries. Homosexual in the fact that it is progressive. It supports LGBTQ rights. It supports, minority rights, this, that, the other. And the primary frame of reference from a moral or political system is probably mixed economy capitalism and liberal democracy. So what this really boils down to is this a good thing? You can't deny that it's in power. You can't deny that it has influence. You can't deny that it's encroaching on the nationalist projects of other people across the world. The question is, what does a world with the United States at the global helm look like? And is that a world worthy of achieving? Or would it be better, something that I've heard repeatedly in these conversations is political realism and multipolarity, meaning that we're going to look at what the empire is, not what it could achieve if we pushed it to, but realistically, what is it going to achieve? The blowback from those events. And then also multipolarity, having national checks against the global hegemon of the United States. So yeah, I think that's really the crux of the argument. If you want to get into details, we can. But is American hegemony a good thing? Is global homo liberal progressive hegemony a good thing? And if not, what are the alternatives? And I don't need my full 10 minutes. I can leave it there.
Go ahead, Nick.
Okay, well, that's sort of an interesting position. I thought this was a debate about the Russia-Ukraine war.
We can do that if you want. I don't care.
Well, it certainly is an interesting angle. I think you're right in the sense that the greater significance of the Russia-Ukraine conflict is really about the world order. And I think that if you read between the lines in the rhetoric coming from NATO and the United States, the reason they consider this an existential threat, or rather treating it like it's an existential threat, why they have sort of thrown in so much their fortunes with the fate of Ukraine, is because they know that it's something like American hegemony and American credibility, which is on the line here. And basically, since 2014, that's been even before that, maybe you could say since 2012, the discussion has been about, at least the conversation about America and Russia has been about American decline, relative American decline. And I think that I think what I just heard from you, the argument is sort of moot, because whether or not we think American hegemony is a good thing, it's over, or at least it's on its way out. And that is what's being borne out right now by this conflict. It seems that a Russian victory is all but certain and inevitable. And when Putin is able to dictate what goes on in, maybe there's a new country, it's a liberated Luhansk and Donetsk, or maybe it's annexed with Russia. Or if you don't consider that valid, maybe it's only a matter of time before China takes over Taiwan. But the point is that a surging and revanchist Russia and China picking up where they left off as great powers in the world signals the end. And that comes along too with I think a greater degree of strategic autonomy for Europe, which I think is only going to increase over time. I think it signals the end of American hegemony. Whether that is good or bad, I guess that's subject to debate. But it is a fact that unipolar moment is past and is over. And I would say that, if there is an argument about whether or not it's a good thing, I would say that a conflict like the Russia-Ukraine war is a failure of American hegemony. I think that if anything, it demonstrates a failure, that this is, it's the inability of the U.S. foreign policy apparatus, national security apparatus to relinquish control that they don't have. And I think that ultimately was the cause of this unnecessary and needless war. I don't think the failure of diplomacy came from Russia. I think it's been a persistent failure to listen by the United States. And you could say it's something like an overestimation of their capabilities. You could call it hubris. And I think that that's one of the reasons why it is a good thing that this is in fact occurring. But it's a moot point whether or not it's good or bad, because like I said, it's a fact that the unipolar moment was an anomaly, and now it's naturally, inevitably coming to an end. But yeah, it sounds like this isn't really so much about Russia, Ukraine. It's really now more about the
that was.
I can disagree. I can disagree with some of these facts.
Okay.
So
by the way, what's going on? Hold on, wait. What's going on with this? What is this? I have to, because the audience is asking too. I mean, what is this contraption here? Like, what is that? Like,
I'm a fucking boomer, and I have shoulder pain. So
oh, okay.
I have to,
all right.
I have to roll out my fucking shoulders.
Okay, it's fine. I knew there was something behind it.
It's not anything sexual.
Okay,
I promise.
All right, cool. All right. I was curious myself because I didn't really know, and so I just figured out.
Now, if you're old and your back hurts, you should get one of these. Okay, it's called a Theracane to all our aging groypers and Killstream fans. So,
okay.
All right. So anyway, so the facts that I can contest. Oh shit. All right, as long as you guys can hear me, that's okay. So basically, the facts that like Cato, I want to say, was like a famous Roman, philosopher or some shit, and basically he predicted the fall of the Roman Empire 300 years before it happened. So there's no sense in being Chicken Little before your time. Like don't freak the fuck out before things go down. And also there was plenty of times to save the empires. So for instance, there was like Bulgarian Roman generals who were shit on by Rome because they were from a different ethnicity group, and they actually fought to preserve the empire and successfully did so, and basically fought to preserve the empire going forward. And so to get to the top, this is kind of like where we're getting to the top of American imperium, and to just go, oh well, the only way down, or the only way forward is down. I think that's probably true. But I also think that there's a lot of opportunity as well, and to just say, "Oh, it's over," we might as well just fucking commit like cultural and global seppuku now, is kind of like a little preemptive. Also, what I would say is, Russian victory is all but certain. If you're measuring victory as in like Donetsk, Luhansk, and Crimea, that they're going to retain those territories, that's fine. But you can't tell me that like Russia wouldn't have preferred a government in Kiev or Kiev, however the fuck you want to pronounce it, that was more sympathetic to their interest and that was more sympathetic to the Russian people. The fact that they're not getting that, I would see that as a miscalculation on their end. Whose fault it is, I kind of don't really give a fuck. But the truth is that I think that we could probably reach a diplomatic settlement where Donetsk, Luhansk, and Crimea go to the Russians. They maintain their Black Sea access. They maintain whatever that shit is. But basically, I think that Odessa, and I think probably the western half of Ukraine, needs to be maintained with the Ukrainians that are currently fighting. And that could be a diplomatic solution that could be reached with Russian participation. I don't view this as a total Russian victory.
Well, I would say in the first place, it's not a question of whether the American empire is over. It's just a question of this unipolar moment and this uncontested global American hegemony that we're talking about. We're talking about essentially, will the United States have this unchallenged capacity to dictate what goes on the borders of other great powers like Russia and China. I would say that their inability to do that does not mean that American empire is over. I agree with you certainly that American empire will persist. I think that America will be the most powerful country in the world probably for some time. But we're talking about a very specific and peculiar arrangement which resulted from the Cold War, where the next strongest country could not match the United States, and the next strongest country with any combination of all the other successive great countries would not be able to challenge the United States, and that's the dynamic that's coming to an end. That's the unipolar, where there's one pole coming to an end. And so whether you say that China is perfectly a peer competitor or Russia's a peer competitor, it is true that they're far more powerful relatively to the United States now than they were 30 years ago. And that's going to change the power projection capability of the United States, specifically when it comes to the immediate sphere of influence of these countries, like in the South China Sea, or in Eastern Europe, or in Central Asia, or the Caucasus. And so when I say American hegemony is coming to an end, I don't mean American hegemony over the Western Hemisphere is not coming to an end. American hegemony in probably most of the world is not coming to an end anytime soon. But certainly this sort of uncontested, again, this unipole situation is over. And I think that that's actually a natural development. I think that's an inevitable development. I think it's something that we need to carefully manage because, you understand about China. China has always been a great civilization alongside the West. Russian Empire has always been a great power, a great civilization. And so the idea that the United States is going to maintain this sort of post-World War II, post-Cold War dominance that it's had in relative terms forever, it's completely unsustainable. And that I don't think that has any bearing on how the American empire is managed or diplomatic decisions we make. I think that's just a consequence of the productive capacities and the volume, really, of the Chinese people and of Russian land. Russia has it's a petro state, and it's got a European population and lots of people and lots of arable land, and so Russia is going to, as a consequence of those factors, will be a great power. China, because of its population and because of its territory and all of that, will be a great power, and that is okay. And I think that we must accept this. As for the Russian victory in Ukraine, I would say it's presumptuous to say that Russia wanted to control Western Ukraine. And I only say that because it would be untenable. We know that the goal from the start, the stated goal, was to achieve the full liberation of Luhansk and Donetsk. And it's easy to see why. The Ukraine east of the Dnieper River is majority ethnically Russian and Russian speaking. And what that implies is that annexing that territory or having a pro-Russian Novorossiyan government govern that or administer that territory is actually not going to be such a difficult proposition. The reason Russia was able to annex Crimea is because the people there didn't protest that because they were Russian, whereas that's not the case in Western Ukraine. You could say maybe they wanted Odessa to connect Transnistria all the way through. But I think it's a little bit presumptuous. And in any case, the key victory is they will have achieved the demilitarization of Ukraine. They'll have destroyed the Ukrainian armed forces. They will have precluded Ukraine from joining NATO and having a NATO state controlling the Black Sea on their border east of the Dnieper River. And then what's more is they'll have achieved the liberation of the ethnic Russian people in Donbass and Crimea. So those victory conditions, I think are sufficient to say that Russia will have won. And despite the United States doing everything they couldn't prevent that from happening.
Sure. The most costly thing that you can do as an empire is a land war in Asia. So the fact that basically this is boiling down to a geopolitical reality. I know people might not be able to imagine the map in their mind, but realistically, what you're talking about between like Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, those countries to the north, and then basically, I think Belarus is always going to remain Russian friendly. Moldova will probably remain neutral or Russia friendly, and then Western Ukraine will be hostile. Eastern Ukraine will be friendly. But that's the thing is, like, if you look at the original USSR, And if you were thinking of these as like longitudinal players, where you're like thinking of it over a century rather than like necessarily national governments, I would say that Western Europe and the United States as a backer of like Western hegemony or whatever has made great inroads into Eastern Europe compared to like the old Soviet bloc. So you can say this is a victory condition, but I would say this is a victory condition like, winning 1 of 30 games, at home. And you're like, well, we won at home. And it's like, okay, well, fuck it. I mean, you were bound to do so eventually. So I guess this is it. My point being though, and like, I don't really necessarily have a counter rebuttal. I think that the unipolar moment, if that was advocated for by, I don't know, DC Beltway douchebags, it was like a fantastic utopian moment, kind of like a misunderstanding of the end of history. And what I mean by that is that you always see the ebb and flow of power. Power abhors a vacuum. China is not, they were never going to allow themselves to be like a second class power. Now, maybe they will be. Maybe they will be for a century. Maybe they will be for 2 centuries. But their goal is always going to end up being peer with the United States, if not preeminent. And so that's actually going to be the question that we're looking at ourselves now, is because I see a lot of dystopian shit going on in China right now. Is our material concerns, our material wealth, is that should we sacrifice that in order to acknowledge the reality of Chinese power, or should we be making moral arguments? And then when it comes to sphere of influence, basically Asian countries that might have a natural inclination to resist China, should we be encouraging them towards liberalism? Should we be encouraging them towards mixed economy capitalism, this, that, the other? Or do we just say, fuck it? Like you're in their sphere of influence, you're going to win eventually anyways, and the material are going to outweigh the moral, so fuck it. And here's my thing. Dealing with your side, just viewing some content, there has been praise for China in the past, whereas some of these things I view as like absolutely contradictory to the United States. And by that, I mean, like, just look at the way that they're managing COVID. They're literally like basically locking down people into a tiny city. They're killing their animals in order to have zero COVID. They're basically, they have like, what do you call it? Like the surveillance state. You think the surveillance states of the United States is fucking bad. They basically don't even give a shit. They're just like, yep, this is what we're doing. Fuck you. Social credit. So that's where, from my perspective, with the acknowledgement of the tripolar world or the quadpolar world, okay, fine. That's the bent of history. But does it matter what we advocate for? And is liberalism the best system to advocate for globally? And I suspect that you would say no. And that's kind of the real contestation.
Yeah, so then I guess the question, the problem is this. The problem is, I am ultimately a realist, and I think that we can compare the systems and say, liberal democracy versus whatever the Chinese have, if you want to call that a mixed economy, a market socialist or state capitalist or something. But the reality is Chinese power. The reality is Russian and Chinese power. And China will not be a liberal country anytime soon. Russia will not be a liberal country anytime soon. It's just not. It is just not in the character of that nation. And it's interesting to hear you say that, because
I'm asking you what you want.
What do I want?
Yeah,
I want Christian empire is what I want. I would like to see the United States continue. I would like to see American primacy, but I would like to see, you talk about moral, I would like to see real morality, which proceeds from God and which proceeds from Christianity. And so I would like to see something like U.S. primacy, an alliance with Europe, an alliance with Russia. You call that a posse of, that's Richard Haas coined that term, and Watchful Sheriff, I believe. A posse between, Christendom, the Russian, and Sam Huntington, when he broke down Clash of Civilizations, he said, you have the Orthodox civilization, you have the so-called Western civilization. I think the natural alliance would be between the Orthodox and the Western civilization against Cynic and Muslim civilization. Or you could use the Richard Haas lingo and say that's a posse: France, UK, Germany, Italy, Russia, the United States, AUKUS, But I'd like to see them pushing Christianity.
So let's just assume this for a second, because I'm going to try to understand your worldview, and then I'm going to try to come up with the challenges that face it. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So I would basically say that there's a lot of things going for it, which is Central America, South America, and North America are Christian descended colonial states that all have a history of Christendom. So they all have that history. Europe as a whole has that history, and Russia as a whole has that history. If you're talking about an alliance between the Orthodox and the Catholic, and God help me, Protestants, right? The problem is that at the core of this imperium is the story of Christ. And it seems like with every passing decade, we're getting more secular, more hedonistic, more nihilistic, moving away from the message. And it seems that with technology and mass culture and internationalism or globalism, whatever you want to call it, it seems like the opportunity for this kind of national or identifiable revival, and for it to be literally like an L-shaped empire on top of the world, is I don't know how you would achieve a Christian revival in the United States, a Christian revival in Europe, get people to see this as a cooperative opportunity, and recreate the Christendom empire. I just, do you see if you're a doomer about liberalist or liberal empire, how can you be optimistic about Christian empire?
Well, I think the case of the Soviet Union is instructive. The Soviet Union was an atheistic pariah state for nearly a century. And they promulgated atheism and communism throughout the world, Bolshevism for, the better part of the last century. And what has emerged is I'm under no illusions about Russia. Some people have wrongly attributed this idea to me that I support Putin because Russia's based and trad, and I recognize that it's not really.
Have
those
you
things.
seen their sweet military church? Because it's pretty cool looking.
I have. It is very cool. I do like the Orthodox churches, but when you look at Vladimir Putin, who is, you could say, the new emperor. I mean, just like they had a czar and then they had a general secretary. Now they've got their president, and we all know functionally what that is. It's the old Cesaro papism, right? It's the old, not perfectly, but it's the old sort of strongman leader. He is bringing back the Orthodox Christian church. And certainly that is supplanting, if the mythology of communism is what animated the Soviet Union, if that was their sort of founding idea, Orthodox Christianity and sort of Russian Empire is the new mythology of the federal Russian state. And so I actually don't think it's so outlandish to say that there would be a Christian revival in America and that would not form the basis. Because here's the thing. I think that the liberal premise of America is really the thing that's falling apart in the wake of multiracialism, in the wake of technology and wealth inequality. I think it's actually liberalism, which is the ideology that's failing. If I were to look at the systems, if we were to look at it morally between China and the United States and Russia, which system would have the most longevity? When I look at the BLM, tranny, nightmare country run by Mark Zuckerberg and Jeff Bezos, compared to China, which has Confucianism and has this idea of like Chinese Han ethnic supremacy, and again, the Russian Orthodox Church, I would definitely put it on the latter two things as opposed to our fledgling system. I think that there isn't even really there's not even really like a Western canon anymore. What's the canon? Malcolm X and Elie Wiesel. I mean, this is not a canon that forms the basis of a great empire. So
this is interesting. This part of the structural problem with liberalism is that it doesn't have a lot of like moral prescriptions, right? It's like a syncretist worldview in which you can incorporate anybody under their belief structure as long as they adhere to liberalism, as long as they pay their taxes, as long as they agree to like the little charter of human rights that we have. But I do agree. Not only do I agree with this charter of human rights, but I actually think it's quite powerful. If you look at the cultural narrative of I think you could just as easily say Germany. Like, they had a strong core. They had fascism. They had Christianity co-opted by the state. They had political corporatism and a narrative that allowed them to kind of reach out into their world and create their imperial state. Now we can get into like the historical whatever, but basically what happened is a bunch of disparate, disunified, broken, culturally bankrupt, whatever the fuck you want to call them, countries didn't want to get pushed around. They came together under a single banner of fuck Germany, and they kicked them right in the teeth. And that's also what I kind of see in Russia right now, where you have countries that were previously completely anti-NATO that are getting ready. Germany is actually funding its military. Sweden and Finland are actually thinking about joining NATO and taking votes and considering it. And this was something that wasn't even considered a few years ago. Also, when it comes to Ukraine, you can say this negatively or positively. The amount of money and weapons that poured into Ukraine from Western Europe and from the Western world, I think that really sustained the Ukrainian armed forces to fight battles that we didn't expect them to fight. I expected them to capitulate. I thought that they were going to fall apart in 2 weeks, and they're still fighting right now. So that's where I'm saying, like, the Western Empire, while disunified narratively, and that's something that I want to kind of like challenge and fix, the actual material wealth is there, and then it seems like when there's a crisis we come together, and so that's where for me the cultural unity doesn't mean much if it's a dog shit culture.
I would say that I would disagree about your characterization of World War II. That everybody got together to kick the shit nuggets out of the Nazis. I don't think that's actually how it happened, because you had Imperial Japan and Nazi Germany and Fascist Italy, and you had was Austria-Hungary was with them, and they actually had a lot going for them. I think Germany took over the entire continent. They took over Africa, and if they just
then what happened?
Well, then of course they attacked the Soviet Union, and that was their mistake. And they got their nightmare coalition of Russia, France, the UK, America. But if Japan, well, because remember, the United States declares war on Japan and Nazi Germany declares war on the United States. If the United States was kept out of the war, and if the Soviet Union were kept out of the war, we would have had a German fascist Europe. We would have had an imperial Japanese Asia. It would have been a totally different world. But there are a couple of key things that happen there and not that would be a good thing. That would be a horrible thing. I'm not saying that like
all right.
I want that. I don't want that.
Okay.
I wanted Moscow and London to win. I love the Jews in Moscow, and the Rothschilds in London.
I can tell. Yeah. Okay. All right. So all right. So let me ask you a real question, because this is something that's been like fucking crawling in the back of my head for a really long time. All right, based Orthodox Western Christian imperium across the Western world, et cetera, we follow our own cultural narrative, maybe because race isn't nothing, but it's not everything. There's a bunch of parallel European colonialist societies in the Americas that all have their distinct cultures and parallel moves going forward, but they're all unified into this broader Christian imperium or whatever. Let's say this is the ideal. So I think, okay, whatever, Christian monarchism or Christian, not even really like theocracy. Cause I mean, obviously you could achieve these things within like a republic that was just heavily Christian, that had Christian values. So you wouldn't have to completely overturn, the system, but, there is a, what I would say, if I was to boil fascism down, which we all know is bad, disavow, blah, blah,
evil,
blah.
Completely evil,
yes. Yeah. So I view fascism as two key tenets, which is political corporatism and flexible authoritarianism. What I mean by political corporatism is just treating the nation as a body, identifying the parts that are hurting, identify the parts that feel good, basically using the parts that feel good in order to heal the parts that are weak, and to try to create a healthy, happy, regenerative society over time. I actually have no problem with political corporatism. I think that it's how most nation states operated throughout history, and I think it's a useful tool to evaluate the health of a society and try to fix social ills. So I'm completely cool with political corporatism. Where I get lost is the flexible authoritarianism, basically saying like the rules that we create for ourselves, republicanism, principles, that maybe what you see as a myth of liberalism, all that kind of stuff, these things don't matter. And whatever rules or organizations or institutions that stand in our way, we need to push past because our broader goals are more important than the laws that our forefathers kind of enshrined for us or the institutions that came before us. We have a vision. We have to achieve it. Whatever we need to do in order to achieve that goal is necessary. So for me, I'll wrap it up. But how do you view yourself on that spectrum as far as like respect for the Constitution or respect for republicanism or the liberal Enlightenment project, and what you would be willing to do to transform it to achieve this broader ideological goal?
Well, I would say that maybe what would differentiate a so-called reactionary from a liberal, I'm a believer in the Constitution. I'm a believer in the Bill of Rights and these things. But I guess maybe the departure is that we believe that the government should not be cultivating things that will undo itself. And so I think that's a key distinction, is where somebody like myself would depart from a regular conservative, where I would say that if we're doing something that is like in principle the liberal thing to do, but yet it's going to give us what we know to be a bad outcome, I would not want the bad outcome. And I understand this idea that we need to be a nation of laws and there needs to be sort of like norms and things like that. But, Schmidt writes about this, that the government has to sort of protect the established order, even if that means sort of compromising the principles under which the established order is founded. So yeah, I mean, I don't call myself a fascist. I honestly think that fascism is a little bit of a spook. Because you look at the kinds of fascism and it's all sort of, you've got National Socialism, you've got Phalangism, you've got what Mussolini had, and those are really the three fascist countries, and National Socialism and Phalangism are sort of exceptional. There's really only one like general fascism that you've ever had. So I don't really think I don't know how real it even is. I think it's really just a sort of, it's this filler word for like the way how things used to be. I feel like that, under certain definition, you could say that like George Washington was a fascist. I feel like you could say that a lot of leaders were. Yeah, Abraham Lincoln, Stalin. I think that fascism is just it's sort of like this flavor of authoritarianism that like leftists don't like. So
yeah. Okay, so would you and people who follow you or whatever, like if I was talking about Nick Fuentes with somebody else and I just say Christian nationalist, is there any objection, or do you feel like that word doesn't encompass any particular part of your worldview, or do you think it's like sufficiently summarizing your view?
I would say that that's sufficient. I would say though that I'm a reactionary too, because Christian nationalism could be somewhat vague, and nationalism could even be vague. So I would say I'm really reactionary.
So why do you view so what do you mean by reactionary?
I mean to say that I am I'm illiberal. I'm reactionary, meaning as the antithesis of revolutionary, meaning I'm sort of against the outcome of the Enlightenment. I'm against the triumph of liberalism. Which is a little bit deeper, because Christian nationalism, you could take that to mean a lot of things. You could have a very liberal definition of what that would look like. You could kind of call like what we had in America 10 years ago, Christian nationalism, if you were being sort of charitable.
So that's kind of where I think we're historically opposed. So if I was in Rome at the time of Rome, I would want to defend Rome and the Republic and the system of laws and all that kind of stuff, because I would see the fruits of Rome as amazing, like imperium, syncretic cultures working together for common ends, the material wealth that was distributed by them, the rule of law, the professional military, all of these things I would view as the fruits of Roman Imperium. In the same way I view American liberalism, I view our fruits, which is like out of an $84 trillion global economy, we're 65 trillion of it if you consider like America and American aligned governments. We're like easily 2/3, 75% of the global economy is reliant on America. And even our enemies have to trade with us because we're just so big as a bloc. Then when it comes to liberalism, I think there's things that are powerful and good. Like freedom of speech, freedom of conscience, right to self-defense, limited government. And I don't mean limited government like a libertarian where it's like, oh, like if you tax me, I have to shoot you because like roads are for pussies or some shit. That's not what I mean. I just mean like a government that follows its own laws. And so I see these fruits, I see this foundation, and I think it's pretty easily modifiable into what I want, because what I want is the thing that's preventing what I want is a spiritual decay. It's a crushing of what we used to be, but that's because liberalism doesn't in and of itself have any moral prescriptions about the spiritual lives of its adherents. Just pay your taxes. Like, I don't care if you're a nihilist or a hedonist or a Christian or a Muslim, just pay your fucking taxes and allow the empire to continue. But when you have an entire generation that's demoralized and basically on the verge of killing themselves and they're addicted to so many things and they can't have kids, that's a fucking problem, because basically you're destroying the empire from within, from rot. Now, my prescription, I feel like Christian nationalism or Christendom is jumping back too far back. And the reason why is because I don't believe in the resurrection. I don't think that's a core through which you could build out the Western Imperium. Whereas I think that liberalism through syncretism, material power, all that kind of stuff, you could come up with a unifying narrative of multiple peoples, languages, ethnicities, and all that kind of stuff that could be sustainable in the long term. And I think that's an easier project than, I don't know, Christendom.
Yeah, I just think that the real problem of modernity is the nihilism. I think that's the real problem, is the nihilism, and there's no answer to that. People have, the problem you're talking about has been around for a long time, which is you get rid of God and you get rid of the moral law and you get rid of the supernatural and the idea of the spirit, and you're left with this sort of, well, why? Why do I care? Why do I get out of bed? And
fuck people and do drugs.
Yeah, and or kill yourself or go kill other people.
For fun.
Yeah, because without those other things, you have a real problem of dread and a crisis of why, a crisis of meaning. And I think that the fruits of what you see here is not the result of a liberal system. It's the result of Christendom. It's the result of, ultimately, everything that we have here is a product of two things. It's a product of the European race and of Christendom. Not really so much from democracy, because, of course, the technology, all these kinds of things, that's a consequence of human ingenuity. You could say that there's a certain kind of like political culture that allows people to get together in university and thrive and so on, but it rests on the foundations of truth and rationality. And it's really, when you look at like, where do the universities come from? Where do these things come from? It really came from the church. And now that in the universities, you've got sort of liberalism turned in against itself, and it's this anti-white stuff and everything, and irrationality, and
so
undermining itself.
Well, so I'm a Gnostic. Okay. I don't know if there's an afterlife, but I believe in, basically a God, right?
What's the big idea going to be? What's the thing you're talking about where all the people get together for liberalism? Why? What's the why? For why are we going to create a national revival and care about our work?
So we don't kill each other because the alternatives are infinitely worse. That's
right.
Yeah, like so maybe maybe I haven't framed sufficient of a narrative. But if you're asking for the carrot, it's like I might have a couple of baby carrots to, throw your way. But if you're asking about the stick, I feel like the stick is pretty fucking huge, which is basically like the, I don't know, material and physical and political collapse of the Western world. I think that should be a big enough stick to beat people into cooperation.
Yeah, but why should anyone care?
Because it'll literally kill you. Like,
why should anyone care, though?
We're
all going to die anyway.
Oh man, no, I do love this because I do think that there's in a logical nihilism that people can work themselves into, and I think that we've worked ourselves into in a culture. I think that logical nihilism doesn't stand up to actual suffering. So, for instance, if somebody's like, "Well, why should I care?" You could just kill me now and I wouldn't give a shit because in a cosmic sense, who gives a fuck? If you pull out a knife and start chasing that person around the room, they're still going to run. And so that's kind of my thing is like, we can start making observations about human behavior in the natural world. And one of the things that you said that you're like, what is the foundation? I think the way that you saw the foundation as logos, truth, like undeniable truth, that is the foundation. And what I think is interesting, I don't racialize it because I think these ideas could be universal. I mean, you can see Japanese and Chinese Christians and all that kind of stuff. For me, I think culture is memeable and transferable. So I don't think that these things are set in stone, basically. But the idea, at least as far as I understand it for logos, is that the truth is the truth whether you like it or not. So Christian nationalists or whatever will say like, okay, well, that means the Bible is true regardless of whether or not you like it or not. Therefore, you have to follow our worldview. For me, it's a little bit crueler than that, which is the truth regardless of whether or not you like it or not, meaning that if God isn't real, if Christianity isn't real, then there's still a foundation there because the truth is the truth regardless of whether you like it or not. And so for me, that's God. That's logos. That's the foundation. That's what you can build. And if you do have a truth-centered society, you can extrapolate out logical paradigms. I agree with you that existentialism, nihilism, postmodernism, it's a self-eating monster where it's like, oh, well, your narrative is as good as my narrative, so why not child sacrifice? Because fuck it, it's just your worldview, bro. Whereas if you did have logos, which is the truth no matter what, you could extrapolate out a logic frame, which is like all creatures are living. Most creatures don't want to die with a few exceptions. You can create suffering by hurting and harming other living creatures. Therefore, you should minimize that as much as possible. Therefore, if you should minimize that as much as possible, you should refrain from things like rape or murder or things that are deemed to be emotionally traumatic. So that's where, for me, the extrapolation is still there, and rebuilding it on Christianity is actually, I know that you're not going to concede that it's shaky ground, but for me, it's shaky ground on which to rest the world, because not everybody is going to believe in Christ, but everybody could believe in the truth. And so that's where I have a problem with your foundation.
But Christ is the truth. That's the thing. And the problem with Gnosticism is, where is the concreteness? Where is the specificity? This sort of vapid idea and truth itself, without the flesh, without a real Savior and a real doctrine and a real church and all those things, it really does us no good. I don't know that anybody. I don't know that a civilizational revival is going to be animated by this sort of ambiguous attachment to the truth or something.
Oh, my project is harder than yours, for sure.
Well, I think it's impossible. It's impossible. And I think that what you'll get instead is the triumph of something far more cruel. I think that society is looking back, and it's looking back to its ancient ways and its sort of wicked nature. And so where you don't find Christianity, you'll find people wearing rocks around their neck. They're wearing crystals, and they're looking into astrology and witchcraft, and they're looking back into these sort of primitive things. And my fear is that even in an ideological sense, you look at like the Russian Empire is a good example of this, because the original debate was about Russia, but it's also a good example. You had the autocracy, which was brutal. The autocracy had a secret police, and the autocracy was sort of trying to cleanse the ethnicities on the periphery of the empire. And then what came next was far worse. The communists that came next were absolute butchers. And that's the kind of thing that I fear, is that Without, and Fulton Sheen has a good quote about this, about the West versus the Soviet Union. He said that the Russians have the cross without the Christ, and the West has the Christ without the cross. The West has the love and the compassion and forgiveness and all of this without the sacrifice and the obligation and all this. And the Russians have the sacrifice and the brutality and all of that without the love, without the Christ on the cross. And I think that what you're going to get in the absence of Christianity, what if you could call it liberalism, if you call it the Chinese system, whatever it's going to be, it's going to be brutal, because it turns out that people are twisted and people are wicked. The flesh is wicked. The world is wicked. And before Christ, it was a wicked and brutal and savage place. And after Christ, I feel like it's going to go the same way. I feel like people are not going to settle for this kind of therapeutic, liberal, managerial thing that you're talking about. Like, we just want the truth. I think they're going to turn to, like, we need to kill people. We need to sacrifice people for injustice. There's evil in the world. There's suffering in the world, and someone's got to pay. We need to put up a scapegoat and sacrifice them. I think that's really where the world is headed in the absence of Christianity, because that's the only thing that's powerful. It's a moral war going on. It's a spiritual war.
But if I was to boil down, so for instance, like if you were to take the story, or if you were to take logos, like truth is the truth no matter what, or if you were to take the message of Christ, like you could pick. I'm not trying to pick one. I'm trying to pick many of them. Okay. So if you were trying to pick the message of Christ, like, love thy neighbor as thyself or whatever, or for instance, like I'm trying to think of another one that's not all soft and pussified, because I know the soft and pussified ones more than the hardcore ones. But basically, I'm saying that there is a certain amount of strikos. The meek shall inherit the earth. Meek doesn't mean somebody who's weak. It means somebody who has discipline, strength, and restraint, and the ability to control strength. So for instance, like there are dozens, hundreds, thousands of moral lessons that are baked into Christianity that I think are not only worthy of learning, but necessary to create a healthy and happy society. But I think what happens is a lot of secular people, because it comes through religion, and a lot of them are traumatized by religion. They don't believe in the mythology, this, that, the other. They're gay, or they were persecuted as kids, or somebody threw a rock at them, or called them a fabbit. These kinds of things basically turn people off from religion, and as a result, when they turn away from it completely, they got nothing. And for me, they're kind of trying to rebuild the wheel, where they create their own morality, but they do it by themselves, because our society has nothing to tell young people except for like liberal tolerance. They make almost no moral prescriptions through the system itself, but that it doesn't have to be that way. So for instance, like there's no reason why education can't include some level of moral education. There's no reason why we can't talk about why truth or not cheating or anything like that is important. And if anything, what we're viewing here through the corruption of our institutions, like public school, for instance, is a lack of spine when it comes to the liberal establishment to make moral prescriptions. But there are moral prescriptions that most people believe in, like telling the truth, not stealing, not lying, not being a dick, not fighting, not killing, not murdering, not raping. These are relatively universal and could be promoted and educated. So, I know that we're in contrary projects. You're saying that it needs to be rooted in Christianity, and as a result, that would strengthen your position. And I'm saying it doesn't need to be rooted in Christianity, so that strengthens my position. But that's my point, is you're going to catch more people into the moral system if you're not saying it has to be nested within Christianity.
Yeah, I just, again,
we're on different projects.
No, this idea of like, don't be an asshole. It's like, you cannot build a civilization on saying, don't be an asshole. It's like, because the necessary answer to that is like, okay, why not? Don't steal. Why? Don't kill. Why? Because it causes suffering. Okay, why do I care? Because we're all people and we should be empathetic. Okay, why ought we be empathetic? Well, because what if someone did that to you? Why would that matter? Why would it matter if there's no soul, and if there's no meaning,
consequence.
We have to attach significance to our existence here. And this idea that we're like on this blue rock and like, oh, don't take anything too seriously, bro. Like, it's like, yeah, I mean, why would anyone take anything? Why would anyone sacrifice? Because here's the thing, and this is really the foundation of the Christian worldview, is that our nature is wicked. The nature of our flesh is wicked. And so if we're going to become good, if we're going to be christened and brought closer to God, we have got to resist sin. We've got to resist temptation. We've got to resist the sort of natural tendency of the flesh. And like, why would anyone do that if there wasn't a clear directive from a higher power with a judgment, with the consequence for anybody to do that? I just don't think that that it's reasonable to ask that of people without that.
Okay. I understand, and if anything, you perfectly articulated why I hate nihilist anti-theists, why I hate people who are anti-religion, because they will be like, oh, well, we can just obliterate it all and it won't fucking matter. And it's like, nah, people are going to like suffer seriously as a result of your worldview. And when people ask, why should I care that I suffer? I only live once, and on top of that, I might as well just ride this this toilet bowl down into the fucking existential drain. Plenty of people do that. I used to be in law enforcement. I saw that all the time. People literally, you'd be like, hey, bro, you're doing fucking meth. You're doing heroin. You're fucking up. You're stealing from your family. Everybody hates you. Society hates you. You're a fucking piece of shit. You need to get your shit together. And they'd be like, well, that's too hard. And on top of that, why should I care? Plenty of people actually literally will tell you that while they're circling the drain. Dealing with people, though, who are in more left-wing spaces, who are more sympathetic to those people, this, that, the other, they will say that they don't need the meta-narrative of Christ or God in order to save themselves, this, that, the other. I don't fucking believe them. I do think that you need something bigger than yourself, and maybe international, global humanism isn't enough to save humanity from itself. I do understand that. My point, though, is that I literally lived the life of the prodigal son. I'm not kidding. Raised religious, went to church every single Sunday, basically was raised both in the Protestant church and the Catholic church, went to Europe, this, that, the other. And when I was 17, I was like, oh, this is all myths and bullshit. I'm going to go do drugs and, try to finger fuck women and all this bullshit, right? So I went and did that for 5 years, and I was in the military and did some violent shit as well. And when I got back out, I was fucking miserable. Couldn't tell you why. I was like, I'm doing everything I want. I'm chasing women. I'm drinking. I'm smoking pot. Like, I'm doing all this shit. Why am I so fucking miserable? And, I was figuring it out on my own that maybe my parents were right about some shit. Maybe the Bible was right about some shit. Maybe religion was right about some shit. But one of the most important phrases or most important concepts that I learned was happiness is not the same as desire. And getting what you want doesn't always make you happy. That's a huge lesson for a young person to learn. And then the other one is basically sense of purpose and responsibility are correlated. They're not causative, but they're correlated. So if you feel listless, anchorless, feel like you're dying, feel like you're this, that, the other, feel like your life isn't amounting to shit, adopting responsibility for yourself and others can basically be an anchor that roots your life through which you can extrapolate other things that are important to you. The reason why I'm bringing this up is these lessons were rooted in religion, and they were communicated to me in religion, and I rejected them because they came to me in religion. But just through trial and error, I found these things to be true. And so that's where, for me, telling suffering people, listless people, depressed people, that basically what you want and what makes you happy are two separate things, and don't mistake the two. And also telling people that responsibility and purpose are correlated. That's like a fucking cheat sheet for human life. And so, I'm saying, boil it down to a cheat sheet. Don't make it dogmatic. Don't make it authoritative in a religious sense. And you're saying it has to be, or else it doesn't matter.
I'm saying that none of that is sufficient. None of that is sufficient. It is no, but
it's probably true.
No, it's neither true nor is it sufficient. You cannot build a civilization on a spark notes of biblical lessons, because
Mhm.
I think that inherent in maybe this disposition is, and it's sort of interesting because you're a police officer, a former cop, former soldier, so you've seen violence, and so you've seen what people are capable of. I at least I imagine you've seen violence, and so when there are these sort of edge cases, why does anybody kill anybody? Do you think anybody kills somebody because they think they don't have a good reason? People kill people because they think they have a really good reason, and they feel, sometimes it's emotional, sometimes they feel justified. People go to war because they think they feel justified. People rape or do adultery or other terrible things, and they'll think it's the right thing, or they'll justify it to themselves. And so this is like nice for, like, most of the time, if you're just kind of like riding the bus and going to work, it's like, hey, I'm like going to pay my fare on the bus. But it's like, what is the true foundations and roots of the civilization? What is a true moral law? That and there has to be something about the moral law that it's absolute and it's specific, and it has to have consequences for it to matter. Because otherwise, if everything you're saying is true, like, let's create a cheat sheet of biblical lessons, it's like, okay, but what if I really, really want to break the moral law and I have like a really good reason?
Then you'll
Like,
suffer.
why would I not do that? Why would I not
suffer?
Well, what about abortion, for example? Because I saw you talk about abortion.
Why is he pro-choice? Are you pro-choice?
Well,
Not
seemingly.
really.
Well,
But
there was this bill, I guess I saw you talking about
centrist as always.
the Louisiana bill that criminalized, I guess, abortion, made it infanticide. Now, some people who are really religious would say there's no compromise on something like that, right? Like, it's
But
anti-abortion.
there obviously are. So I'll give you. I think so.
Well, right.
But yeah. So in ectopic pregnancy, having a fertilized egg inside the fallopian tube, it's just going to kill the mom. It's not going to do anything. It's not going to develop a fetus. If there's a fetus that, so basically, just to explain my position so we don't have to poke around at it, I think that at 18 weeks from observable fact, the central nervous system goes into the fetus. As a result, it's capable of feeling pain. Inflicting pain on a fetus is, basically morally incorrect. Abortion under 18 weeks is morally incorrect. After 18 weeks, it should probably be legally prohibited, unless there's those like health exceptions, like ectopic or serious deformity or whatever the fuck.
Okay, can we talk about like Russia? Because I feel like
we were talking about the core of Christendom. That's what we were talking about.
Don't get me wrong. This is good stuff, but we sort of like, we started with
next time.
It has completely. I mean, you guys were talking for like an hour. I agree. You know what? I thought it was about. Now you put out a tweet. I thought this was what it was originally about. Saying Russia was basically committing war crimes, and
well, they are
barbaric.
Like if you wanna get autistic and fight about specific shit, we can. Like, you can't tell me that. Like,
what I mean to debate it.
Let's debate about this topic. Oh, well, if you want to get autistic about it, all right, I guess.
Well, okay, so my issue. Okay, so I'm not gonna lie. Jackson Hinkle is a fucking dumbass, and he basically like cheerleads the shit. And the shit that you do that pisses me off is like, Tsar Putin, I salute our boys in the white, blue, and red, or whatever the fuck. Dude, if you didn't have things that were shitposty that I know pissed off people way more, I would have fucking come in here like autistic screeching about that shit. But for me, I think that your rhetoric is rooted in a deeper game, and I like talking about the deeper game. I don't like autistically freaking out over the fucking rhetoric, that the shitty rhetoric you use. If I'm like, oh, did you make a Nazi Holocaust joke fucking 3 years ago? Is that what anybody wants to see? Do we want to fucking relitigate that shit for the 50th fucking time? Fuck that. You're playing a deeper game, and I know you're playing a deeper game. I would rather talk about the deeper game, because there's obviously something that you think is achievable, or even if it's not achievable, you think it's worthy of pursuing. And I think it's not achievable. And I'm worried about the factionalism that it creates. But you're not worried about that, because my civilizational foundation is probably too broad for you to give a shit about. And you nest your civilizational foundation within religion, and you know it to be correct. So how the fuck am I supposed to fight that? You know?
Well, I mean, yeah, I am, of course. I do have an agenda and I do have a deeper worldview, but the reason why I cheerlead Putin is because I like Putin. I mean, it is provocative, but I do support Putin. I think that Putin is brilliant and my hero.
Okay, if this war was achievable, specifically with like throwing artillery shells into civilian areas, if all of the things that could be or needed to be achieved were able to be achieved without artillery shells going into fucking civilian areas, would you prefer that artillery fucking strikes don't happen in civilian areas?
Yeah.
So what's to argue about? Like, you want me to call you a bad person for the next 45 minutes?
No, I don't want you to call me a bad. No, it's clearly there is a real,
because you could also call me a bad person because I'm basically cheerleading American hegemony, and look at how many people it's killed over the past 30 years. But my thing is, I don't deny that. If I see that the Rigel report says that we provided the weapons of mass destruction to Iraq in the 70s and 80s that we then impugned him for 20 years later, I'm not going to deny that. I'm just acknowledging the bigger game.
Okay, but I think there is a real debate to be had about the war in Ukraine and who's at fault here. I think that's part of the bigger conversation about American hegemony. It's part of the bigger story, because there's one story, and you seem to be at sort of a different. You have this sort of liberalist bent, where you say we need a liberalist American global empire for the purpose, which is a very unique position. There's not a lot of people that defend that, but there is a position out there where people are saying democracy is under attack by autocrats like Putin, and this represents aggression by the so-called dictators and the enemies of democracy. And then, of course, there's the Russian side, which says that it's the democratic globalist empire, which is the true pariah. And so where would you fall in that? I think that's a legitimate debate.
I side with liberals, but I think liberals are fucking children. And what I mean by that is, like, so for instance, if we were going to morally impugn Russia for being autocratic, then we just as equally have to impugn 30% of our global coalition for similar crimes. So when you hear, like, we can say, like, okay, well, these people allied with us materially, and we're pushing them culturally through trade ties and cultural ties. I think that can be a real argument defending, like, the liberal establishment is like, we don't want to go to war with everybody. We want to, so for instance, like McDonald's, God help me, is part of the American empire. And now in fucking Kuwait, the fucking, they're basically getting fat as shit because instead of drinking alcohol, they go to McDonald's instead. So, I don't know if that's based in Red Pill or not, but the fucking, but the point being, like, you can go to war with everybody, but you're going to fucking lose. Or you can go to war with your opponents when it suits you and then have cultural and economic warfare. And if anything, I view Russia's actions in this event a moral failure, because I think that they could have achieved the same goals through economic and diplomatic aggression. I think they could have kept the Black Sea. I think they could have kept Donbass, Luhansk, Donetsk. I think they just prefer force.
Do you think they prefer aggression? See, and that's I think where the argument lies, is this idea that it was. Do you think it's out of malice and cruelty that Russia invaded?
No, it's desperation, but it's also it's a misalignment of priority. So, for instance, like, I think they could have kept the Black Sea. I think they could have kept Donetsk, Luhansk. I think they could have kept these things, and or at least kept those populations protected, and they probably could have kept their right to travel to these areas. I don't think that they needed violence in order to achieve the same goal. Just because Ukraine goes into the EU, or even I guess NATO really would be the line for Ukraine, because I'm assuming you can't have Russian military assets traveling freely through a NATO country. That's probably the biggest thing.
Yeah. So do you think, though, that it was unreasonable for the United States to pursue NATO expansion in Ukraine?
At what time? Because I thought we rejected them back in the day.
No, we did not. Throughout from 2008 to 2014. Do you think that was unreasonable?
Without consulting Russia on how they're going to get access to the Black Sea? Yeah. Fuck yeah.
Okay. Then debate. Yeah. Okay, that's a debate, I think.
No, but I mean, like, just to concede, if people are like, oh, he just gave up the point. There's only like 3. I think there might only be 2 Russian warm water ports. One of them is in Crimea. One of them is in Syria, and I want to say the only other one is like a cold. Oh, it might be on like the far east coast or some shit like that. It might be on like I don't fucking remember the names, but it literally might be over by Japan. So I got frustrated with Sitch and Adam and Sargon and you and Destiny, because I think you can concede the geopolitical reality while still impugning the morality. I think that the fact that this wasn't worked at as a diplomatic solution of Russia's going to want to keep the eastern part of Ukraine and they're going to want to keep access to the Black Sea. If we're going to get Ukraine in NATO, we have to figure out how to get the Russians what they want or they're going to attack. If that wasn't a conversation in the room, that's a complete and utter fucking failure.
But that's the thing, though. The Russians did pursue diplomacy. The Russians, like, for example, Trump pulled the United States out of the INF Treaty, Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty, and put the theater support missiles back in the U.S. military doctrine in Europe. Very provocative action. And this is in the Russian military doctrine. They say that this is a problem because in the event of a hypothetical war between NATO and Russia, NATO is going to be sending missiles into Russia that may be conventional missiles, but they also may be nuclear missiles. And they call that warhead ambiguity. That if a missile is flying at Russia, if a short or medium range missile is flying at Russia from an Eastern European country, the Russians really can't assume that that's not a missile carrying a nuclear warhead. And that creates this great escalation. And so the Russians write about this.
How is this not already true with Latvia, Estonia, and Lithuania? And also, how is this not already true but for the fact that we can basically glass each other no matter what?
Well, the point is that this has nothing to do with Ukraine in particular. This is a provocative action because this is about the entire European theater and redeploying missiles to Europe.
Okay, I don't know. Maybe this is because I actually was born at the end of the Cold War. I'm pretty sure everybody between 1945 and 1990 just accepted the fact that if there was a war between Russia and the United States, entire cities would be glassed, and as a result, we probably shouldn't fuck with that shit. And I don't understand how that perspective isn't prevailing right now. We're literally what's the flight time for a short-range or medium-range missile launched from France versus the flight time from a missile launched from Alaska versus the flight time from a missile launched in fucking Ethiopia, Lithuania, or Estonia. Like we're talking about a degree of minutes, and we're still talking about hundreds of thousands of dead. So this is where, maybe Russia has autism. Like, okay, so what? We're fucked anyways. Now what do we want and how do we get it?
Well, the problem is that these are not necessarily nuclear missiles. These are conventional missiles that are being deployed to Europe. But that's the thing. When a missile is sent over, and a short or medium range missile is sent over from Europe into Russia in a hypothetical conflict, that is where a conventional conflict between NATO and Russia then escalates into a nuclear conflict.
Who would start a conventional conflict?
Either country. Of course, it's always ambiguous. It's always, whenever a war starts, it's always ambiguous. You have the fog of war, and it's always disputed what the real cause is, whether it's the beginning of every war is disputed, whether it's 9/11 or Gulf of Tonkin or the Lusitania or any of it.
My contention would be it would be an escalation between the two powers. That you're right, that it would be like ambiguous who started it or whatever. But the chances of NATO intentionally invading Russia without some kind of Russian propagation first is fucking zero.
Okay, but let me finish my point, and then because these is really not important here. The point is, this is a very provocative action. Trump pulling out of the INF was very provocative, and the Russians said so. And even if you look at the neocons, even the DC foreign policy establishment wrote that this was extremely provocative to pull out of the INF. And if you read NPR said in the buildup to this, because this was one of the Russians' demands back in January, was put a moratorium on the missiles in the European theater. And NPR, the mainstream liberal media, the foreign policy establishment, they all said that is one of the more reasonable things that, yeah, probably the United States should do. Now, consider this. So Trump pulls out of the INF and changes the military doctrine. I think this is in 2019. A month after he does this, Putin goes out there and says, this could lead to escalation. This could lead to problems. And he says, let's come together and let's create a moratorium on Russian and American missiles in Europe. They didn't respond. Putin comes back the next year with an even more thorough proposal and says, let's do a moratorium on missiles, and let's even have inspections. Let's have mutual inspections. The Russians can inspect the American missiles, and the Americans can inspect the Russian missiles. And again, the Americans don't even respond to the proposal. Once again, this was part of the diplomacy in January. There were 3 days of diplomacy, if you remember, in Geneva at the beginning of this year, and that was on the table, and there's no give from the American side. And so the question is, if Russia is unnecessarily using force and violence and military means, when you look at something like that, what really could they have done in that situation? And that's just like a taste, but it goes well beyond that. Because you could go back to 2008 when the Americans at the NATO conference said they recognized the aspirations of Ukraine to join NATO. And Putin said, that's not going to happen. But they plowed forward anyway. And the National Endowment for Democracy was giving them money, and they continued to support the resistance there. And that all culminated ultimately in the Maidan, which the United States had a hand in. And so there's just like this persistent inability for the United States to concede the fact that Russia should have some right and some legitimate security interest in the future of Ukraine. And that then Russia's backed into a corner. And you can see the precipitating factors leading up to the conflict this year. You've got U.S. destroyers, or rather a British destroyer in the Black Sea, which is sailing along the disputed territory in Crimea. You've got American bombers flying along Crimea and Donbass. You've got Kiev buying drones from Turkey, a NATO country, and using them in the civil war in Donbass, which represents a big escalation. And it's part of this character. Mm-hmm. Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, well, I was just going to ask that this is all great details. And Ralph, I'm sorry to disappoint you. But this is, what do you want me to object to descriptively? That the United States is a bunch of dicks? That they threw their weight around where they didn't know what the consequences would be? That they risked other people's lives in their national global hegemonic project? I'm going to concede all this. This is all true. It's descriptively true. The question is whether, like in not.
Well, does that make Russia's actions unreasonable? I guess the United States hubris, I guess, is what he's describing.
Right.
Is it really so crazy? And again, it's your take, yes or no. Is it really so crazy for Russia to have done what they've done? I guess is what he's.
Yeah, actually, there's a shitload. There's so many Russian failures. Yes, I think that this probably could have been diplomatically. If you want to point out examples of the Western hegemony throwing its weight around and not really knowing what it's getting itself into and risking other people's lives rather than their own, I don't think you have to look at Ukraine. I think you could just look at, history and see similar patterns. But then the question kind of becomes, like, from a Russian perspective, was this necessary? No. It's not necessary to bomb Lviv in western Ukraine in order to achieve a victory in eastern Ukraine. It's not necessary to artillery strike Kyiv in order to take eastern Ukraine. It's not necessary to fucking take Odessa, the one last port that's left for the fucking Ukrainians in order to gain access to the Black Sea along their own historical territory. It's not necessary for them to artillery strike civilian areas when basically we've all been developing counterinsurgency tactics and techniques for the better part of 30 fucking years, that the United States is stupid enough to basically post online for free. Our special forces literally go onto YouTube and say, hey, this is how you do counterinsurgency warfare, and this is how you clear rooms. And somehow Russians, being the dumb fucks they are literally doing unsupported fucking air raids on goddamn airports and getting fucking slaughtered, artillery striking fucking civilian areas as negotiating chips within a war, and fucking doing unsupported fucking goddamn mechanized columns in the middle of Ukraine that then get attacked by counterinsurgents armed with Western weapons that get slaughtered. So no, while the geopolitical concessions are there, and Donetsk, Luhansk, and Crimea, yeah, these are all realistically Russian territories that should have been negotiated by the Western world. You can't pretend to me that this is fucking 4D chess that the Russians are playing when they're literally sticking their dicks in a blender and acting like they're being smart. No. And also on top of that, here's another fucking thing. I know that Trump, MAGA, whatever, it's probably important to your brand. He's the God Emperor, this, that, the other, or whatever. Is Trump playing 4D chess, or is he an idiot? Or is he doing both at the same time? Because literally, I don't even think that you can tell, let alone I can tell.
What is Trump? What's the angle of Trump?
Well, you were literally saying how, despite him being the God Emperor who has fucking foresight, and he's basically the leader of the Imperium of Man.
Oh, I see.
He somehow stepped on his dick when it came to Russian diplomatic negotiations. If he's such a God Emperor, then how did he fuck this up?
I think that was a mistake. I think that was a mistake for him to escalate the conflict in Ukraine, because that's what he did. And what he ran on in 2016 was a rapprochement with Russia. Famously, he said, "Wouldn't it be great if we got along with Russia?" And that's why a lot of people supported him, because he was out there saying the Iraq war was a mistake and Russia should be our friend. And we don't hate China, but we're going to compete with China. That was the America first foreign policy that everybody voted for. And instead what we got was, and we can quibble about who's ultimately responsible for that. Is that the Pentagon? Is that the State Department? Is that Trump himself? I'm willing to concede for the sake of the debate it was Trump himself. I think that Trump doesn't want war, and I think that Trump, his instinct was rapprochement with Russia, and it was people behind the scenes that wanted this war, and it's the persistent influence of the deep state and military-industrial complex, that whole constellation of institutions. So I will agree with you that the Trump, it was not 4D chess. I think the Trump foreign policy was not what it should have been. I'll agree with you on that. As far as the conduct, though, of the operation, I think we could get into, should Russia have bombed this city? Should they have conducted it in that way? We can get into that. To me, it's less interesting. To me, that's a level of detail which is unnecessary, because it's a war. You're either in the war or you're not in the war. And we could quibble about the conduct of the war, and was this a tactical decision? Was this a justified strategic decision? Was using this kind of bomber against this particular city, is that cruel, or is that part of the overall strategy? I mean, we could get into that, but I think the real basis of the debate is whether or not the war is justified to begin with. And I think that it's basically unquestionable that Russia, because you said earlier, well, Russia should have pursued diplomatic means. They should have used their soft power, in a word. I think that's a good phrase for it. They should have used their economic, political, diplomatic. I think they did that. I think they did that when they took Crimea. I think they did that when they
asked for too much. Oh, sorry.
You good?
Did they ask for too much? So, for instance, like in the most recent negotiations, they were asking that the Ukrainian army draw down to 65,000. What fucking country in the history of the world is going to agree to drawing down its army during an invasion?
But you understand that when Russia comes to the negotiating table, they're there to negotiate. The key things that Russia wanted.
What if I just inverted your logic? We're not just as easily, while we're not in the battle, we're not in the war or whatever. We're not in these diplomatic negotiating rooms. Why do I have to assume good faith on your end and bad faith on mine?
We were in the negotiating room.
You and
not
me?
No, America. America
Okay.
was in Geneva. And so to say that Ukraine would not join NATO is not unreasonable. And by the way, and the reason why we know that is because the United States essentially recommitted to this in, I want to say it was October. I have it in my notes, and I don't want to get autistic here, but you'll have to take my word for it. I could pull it up on my notes, but in October, somewhere in the fall of 2021, they recommitted to essentially a security guarantee without NATO membership. They said, we continue to acknowledge Ukraine's aspirations for NATO. And they re-upped this like 10-year-old security guarantee that they gave a long time ago. And that's really the crux of it, is NATO membership for Ukraine. Everything proceeds from that. I don't know that Putin necessarily thought he was going to get all the troops out of Eastern Europe. I don't know that he necessarily thought there'd be a change in government in Kiev with diplomacy. But I think the crux of it was is Ukraine going to be used as a forward operating base for NATO? Is it going to be used to deploy hypersonic missiles in Ukraine? Is there going to be a Black Sea fleet in Ukraine for NATO? That was really the issue at hand. And the United States was completely unwilling to negotiate on this. And the Russians were backed into a corner. And this is something that's happened over 14 years. And now people want to say, oh, well, I don't like the way the war is being conducted. Oh, well, that bombing they did was cruel. It's like, well, and at some point, there's no choice. There were 200,000 troops on the border. They met in Geneva. And it's typical. The Westerners are so full of hubris. There's no off ramp. They only know one language, and that's escalation, double down, talk tough, stand up, all this kind of stuff. And in my opinion, to even get back to the earlier conversation, that's a failure of American hegemony. I think that when America, which is so much more powerful than Russia, combined with NATO's power, even more powerful than Russia, I think when they have that kind of uncontested power for so long, they think that they don't have to listen to other countries. And then this is where these kinds of miscalculations and misunderstandings, I think that's where they all start to begin, is it's all bound up in that. And I think that's an indictment of American hegemony in itself.
Yeah, so I don't think we're going to disagree. I think that we could come to descriptively saying Russia's case for the war. I think just as easily you could descriptively come to Ukraine's description for the war, whether or not it's justified or some shit. So yeah, it kind of boils down to this core of what do we do now? Is liberal hegemony at its peak? Do we have to accept tripolarity or multipolarity? Do we have to reframe the Western project into Christian nationalism or a liberal hegemonic project? Is there enough of a spine within liberalism to reconstitute whatever we created? And so that's kind of like really this is actually the difference. It's not just a difference in this conflict. It's a difference between me and you. What path do we pursue for the future of the Western world? And my argument is a civic nationalist, probably multi-ethnic, but not multilinguistic. I think it should be a monolanguage for each country. And it can be multi-religious, but there has to be a set of core foundational principles that basically unite us in our belief. And to be honest, when you ask me the question of why not kill myself? Why not do heroin? Why not do coke? Why not, fuck a bunch of women? Why not do strippers? Why not drink alcohol? Why not do this? Why not do that? I only have the logical appeal of you will suffer and you will experience suffering, but I already know that's not enough that's not enough of information for most people. That's part of where ideally I would want to see it culturally. I would want to see it like pushed through education, like, hey, you fuck up this way, your life's going to be fucked. And we actually have the balls to assert that there are good and bad things, and we don't have this like liberal spinelessness that we see in our current social establishments. But I don't know if it'll be enough. And when you ask me if it'll be enough, the answer is I don't know. So, yeah.
Well, I would say to counter all of that, I think that this entire conflict has laid the seeds for the American demise. I think this is the high water mark for the liberal hegemony because, in spite of the fact that, we talk about how the whole world came together to stand up to Putin. I was going to get to this earlier when you made the analogy about everybody coming together to kick the Nazis' teeth in. I was going to get into this, but I got sidetracked bashing, the Allies in World War II. It's actually not true that the whole world.
Although they were based, right? They were based. They were good. They were cool. Go G.I. Joe.
The Allies.
Yeah.
Hell yeah.
Yeah. They were so cool.
G.I. Joe.
Cherry pie.
My grandfather fought in World War II. He fought in
worst
Asian
mechanic the Luftwaffe ever had.
Well, I'm not German, okay? He was Italian. No, but he was on the good guy's side. He was on the good guy's side fighting for the USA, baby.
You mean he switched sides halfway through when he saw the winds blowing in the other direction?
Yeah, something like that. Yeah. But so no, he was an American. I'm fifth generation. All right, I'm fifth generation. But anyway, but it's actually not true that just like in World War II, it's not true that the whole world is standing up to Putler. It's not happening. When you look at the sanctions regime, it's noticeable who's not participating in it. Yeah, the NATO countries are participating in it, of course. India is not participating in it. China's not participating in it. And if you don't have those countries, all of Africa's not participating in it, a lot of the Asian countries, a lot of the Middle Eastern. Okay, but the point is, like, it's interesting.
Do you know what I like about this European conflict? Objection for autistic point, real quick. Europeans are handling it. That's what I like about it. Are Ukrainians fucking fleeing to Africa or fleeing to India or China for fucking no, it's fucking Europeans who are handling it. So you could call it material conditions, whatever. I don't have a fucking problem descriptively what you're saying. I'm talking about it like prescriptively, because basically I already, if it seems like I'm not objecting a lot or calling you a piece of shit or this, that, the other, it's because I understand what you're trying to do. You described it to me. You described the project, what you're looking for out of the world. And I understand how my project is contrary to your project, because I do want a liberalist, hegemonic imperium that is capable of integrating humanity, because I think that that's what's possible to propel us into, like, I don't know, conquering the entire planet, but also potentially like space exploration as well. But the problem, I don't even have a fucking... My problem with your worldview is I think it necessarily breeds conflict that will have to be resolved. So let's say that we created Christian nationalism. Nick Fuentes is, or his great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-grandson is the fucking emperor of the Western Christendom world, okay? He rules from someplace that isn't degenerate, the L shape of the Americas and Europe, okay? And most people are Christian, or they concede to Christian like cultural hegemony. So let's say that happens. I think naturally you will have, like you said, cultures that are based in Islam, cultures that are based in China, cultures that are based, well, I guess Russia is part of the Christendom, right? So basically, Islam, West Africa, and China would all be your competitors, and as a result, that conflict also has to come to an end. Liberalism says we can incorporate all. Yours says we're going to be in conflict, or at least competition, in perpetuity. Because what's Emperor Nicholas the fucking 15th going to do? Is it going to be convert or die? Is it going to be we just compete for the planet? What is it?
Yeah. Yes. Well, here's the thing is, so
and by the way, can you rant to the audience for a little bit? I'm super dehydrated. My neck's driving me fucking crazy. Can I grab some water and be right back?
Yeah.
Can you tell the world about the plans for Nicholas the 15th and his Christian empire? I'm actually really excited.
Go ahead, get some water. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. Wow. Oh, this is what do you think of the debate so far?
It's kind of like, I don't know, tangentially related to Russia, Ukraine. I kind of, my style, kind of just letting you guys go a little bit. But yeah, it's been a good discussion, a little spacey, maybe.
Yeah. A little out there.
Yeah, maybe that's how I would describe it. But it's been cordial. Now, so we can just wait. I don't know if he has his headset with him. Maybe we can just wait for him to get back. No point in talking a bunch if he's not here. He covered up his camera too, which maybe that's a cop thing. I don't.
That's a cop thing.
That's a cop thing. I'm not sure. Somebody said he's been I'd seen that he was a critic for a while. Somebody said that. I didn't know that before today, but I saw some people in chat.
He's a what?
He had been a critic of yours or something. Maybe he wanted to talk about other stuff from the start. I don't know. I don't know if that's true or not. That's what people in chat said. So we'll see once he gets back in here. What his thoughts are. What are your thoughts? I'm trying to. It's not here. It's a debate. So, I guess. Just thoughts on the whole night so far. The big day on Cozy. Things are going great. I got a ton of people watching right now. 7,000 people total watching this debate. Things running well. It's been a great ride on Cozy. When was the start date? I think it was October, right? Somewhere around there.
Yeah, I think it was the beginning of October. So we're entering. It would be what? October, November, December, January, February, March, April, May. So we're entering our 8th month, I guess.
Yeah.
Going pretty well. I'm pretty pleased with it so far. I'm happy with it. I like the debates. I thought this was going to be a little bit more spicy. I thought it was going to be a little bit more contentious, but that's okay.
Well, it's been more of a discussion, I guess you could say. I was looking through. There he is. There he is. Well, that's one reason I kind of brought up the abortion thing, because that seemed like a real difference there too.
Listen, if y'all want to rip each other to shreds, we can fucking do it on something. But at the same time, my whole goal was to understand Nick, because I think it's actually super easy to kind of like snipe behind tweets and snipe behind fucking. Oh, I'm gonna do a 2-hour video essay on what Nick believes without talking to him, and now I'm pretty sure I fucking understand it. Like it's. I don't think you're a fascist, but I think that you see the value in right-wing dissident thought that can be useful. I think you're a Christian in the strictest sense, meaning you believe it to be the foundational cornerstone of the future of Western society. And even if it isn't, you would rather die implementing that vision or trying to implement that vision than basically implement a different vision of the world. And you're a nationalist, where you basically view that like, okay, we can have these parallel societies. I'm not going to lie. So it is really easy to just hear somebody talk about Jews for 30 seconds and be like, oh, he's a Nazi. But I think it's easier. The more complex view is saying like, hey, we have cultural memes that are descended from certain narratives. I'm trying to propagate a narrative that I believe is important, and I want to solidify the culture in the society that will allow my narrative to continue to survive. I think that's a little bit more nuanced, and it's not, even if there was like some 5,000 IQ fucking genocidal game that you're playing in your own fucking head, that doesn't mean that the philosophy itself necessarily has to be that way. So there could be like I don't know what you call it, like integration or incorporation of the American value set, as long as it paid deference to your vision of the future. And so I don't like it. We're on opposing perspectives, and if it came down to violence, we might actually fight. But I understand it, and I don't feel like we're.
Now, what's wrong with it though? You said
what's
you don't
wrong
like
with it?
Yeah, I mean,
actually,
like
I was thinking about this while I was getting water. So what happens to your so let's say that we're in Tsar Nicholas XV is in intercontinental conflict with the Muslims or the Ummah and Sino fucking civilization rebirthed into some kind of weird Confucian syncretic fucking Chinese empire. Okay, there's 3 empires left on the planet, and then aliens. Literally people from other fucking planets show up, and they're like, yo, all that Jesus stuff is bullshit. Your society is based off of a myth. Turns out that like liberal Fabbit from 500 years ago, that Connor guy, he was totally right about the universe. Here's all this lab coat science shit that verifies that he was totally right about everything. And Gnostic, liberal, syncretic humanism was the way to go. What happens then? Are you just like, fuck you, alien? Like, is that what happens?
If Rick and Morty came out of a spaceship and said, "Hey, burp,"
that's an episode. Fucking Rick and Morty meet Nick Fuentes, dude. Somebody fucking at Dan Harmon. He would fucking love that episode.
Well, if that happened, I would say the aliens are demons. I would say that's probably going to happen. I think they're setting up to do exactly that. It's called Project Bluebeam, or some other kind of simulated alien encounter, and I think it will be demonic. The thing is that
so you're going down with the ship.
Well, it's not about going down with the ship. It's about the basis of our religion is metaphysical. It's metaphysical, and it's based on philosophy. Based on philosophy that I don't understand perfectly, I'll add. And it's also based on the truth of the resurrection, which I think there's. The trick is this. I think that the resurrection is an historical fact, and I think it's provable historically. But I also think that if you're not religious, I also think that if you don't believe in the metaphysical idea of Christianity, I think that you can come up with any reason why you would disbelieve that. Oh, the sources aren't credible. Oh, they exaggerated. Oh, I've heard it all before. So, according to my worldview, the aliens coming down, it's just, it's something that's not going to happen. But I mean, I guess maybe the key difference is this. to me, I don't support my religion for a utilitarian reason.
Right.
I'm not promulgating Christianity because I think this is and some people accuse me of this, but it would make no sense. Some people say, "Oh,
I think I actually do. So if you were talking about like my cultural support for Christianity or Christian memes, it is from a utilitarian reason. I feel like there's a lot of good social prescriptions that have been nested within religion that are necessary. Sorry for interrupting. Go ahead.
No, yeah, and that's just it. I think that there is a utilitarian take on that. That's not my take, though. I think that Christianity is true, and I think that in terms of how the world is supposed to end, probably it's not. If you read any Catholic eschatology, it's going to be a pretty ugly affair. It's not going to be like everyone becomes Christian and then we all just float up, and it's going to be actually pretty horrible. So that we may be living in the end times, and this all may be very futile in terms of a political project based on Christianity. The goal for me is promulgating Christianity because it's true. And if there was going to be a sustainable government, it will be based in truth. It will be based in the moral law. And that is Christianity. So, and actually it's interesting. The reason I became religious actually in the first place, I was baptized Catholic. I was confirmed Catholic, but my parents were always very religious. They believed in God, but they weren't really good Catholics. Like we went to church on Christmas and Easter. There was a period where we went to church every Sunday, and I did get confirmed and everything, but like a lot of Catholics, they were sort of lapsed. And so I went into college basically being a Christian, believing in God, but not really practicing it and not really fully understanding it even. And what I began to think a lot about is about this problem of authority and this problem of meaning and the problem of morality, which are all distinct problems. And I thought, in terms of meaning, I thought, what gives my life meaning outside of the material? It's like it's very difficult to persist in this life, suffering and going through the trials of life, if you're not suffering for a reason, if there's not a reason that actually matters. When I say actually matters, I mean, you could say like, well, I'm suffering so that my kids could live a good life. That's actually just kind of like a secondary material interest. It's like, and people don't consider it that way, but that is ultimately what it is. I'm working hard so I could afford a boat. I'm working hard so that my kids could have a comfortable life. I'm working hard so that civilization could be whatever. These are all material things. And so I thought that's really not sufficient. There's this big problem
Is this why you fell out with the more materialist, racialist people? Because they only had a material motivation for what they were doing?
And I don't think that racialism is sufficient. I don't think that racialism is a sufficient idea, and I don't think it's an explainer. And I don't know that I would die for my race or something in a certain sense, because race is material. You could say that race is a character that, your soul may have a certain character because of your race, but you also might say that race is still something that's a sort of an artifact of your flesh, and it's an artifact of the material self. And still it's, I'm not going to go out there and die for, for something because ultimately all the races will perish one day. The whole world will perish one day. And what will it all have been for? It's all a big LARP. And that's really what I'm getting at, is in the absence, without this grounding in something metaphysically real, we're all just LARPing, and it all doesn't matter. And there are no souls, and there is no judgment, and there is no moral law. And whenever we say, oh, America or white or any of these ideas, we're all really just role playing without that grounding in the supernatural reality. We're also sort of self-consciously, and that's really what postmodernism is the self-conscious sort of performance of what the human experience used to be, even though we know it kind of like doesn't matter. And that's why Christianity is the only answer to it, because Christianity is the only thing that says it matters. We're doing this for a reason. But there's other problems too. That's one of the problems. The other problem is morality. Why would we conduct ourselves in a moral way? And where does our conscience come from if not for God? And then there's also this problem of authority, and that goes for all of this.
Are you? Listen, I'm understanding your worldview better by the second, but I also want to play in a little bit. And my neck's driving me fucking crazy, so I don't know how much longer I got left. I'm an old bastard. Okay, so you guys got to deal with me. My frustration. So there's a certain amount of logic that I follow down when we have these conversations about like Christianity, that being the meme that we're going to center society around, and kind of like what the future of reality is, and whether or not like not my Gnostic logos is sufficient. The problem that I have with Christianity is there's a certain illogic to it for me. And I know I'm not supposed to question the nature of God and this, that, the other, but I'm going to anyways, because otherwise what's the fucking point of having this conversation if I'm not going to show you my logic? My logic is that human beings have been around for, allegedly. I know we have some, I'll tell you how dinosaurs fuck in a second.
10,000 years?
Yeah.
What are you about to say?
So, allegedly, our universe is 13.6 billion years old. Allegedly, humanity has been around for a few 100,000 years. Allegedly, humanity has evolved, and it's really only been like the past, 5,000, 10,000 that have seen the material increases in humanity's capacity of understanding each other. And we're kind of at the precipice of looking back through our history, whereas before people were probably so focused on surviving that they didn't even have the ability to understand the past because they just had to survive in the present. So looking back, if we're to trust the lab coats, which I know is cringe, but if we're to trust the lab coats, basically sorry, let me discard this. If we're to trust the lab coats, basically humanity has been around for a really long time, and some of our moral nature pre-existed Christ and pre-existed the Torah and pre-existed Jewish people and all that kind of stuff. And we can see the codification and moving of like more morality over time. Like, so for instance, we're not going to start observing like rabbinic law when it comes to like the fucking temple or some shit when it comes to our ceremonies, because it was set for a different time and a different place. But for them, that was like a morality. Same thing with like the consumption of pork or shellfish or something like that. If you want my real answer on why people don't consume pork and shellfish, it's probably because they saw a bunch of pigs who were fucking rolling around in shit, and then Tom, their neighbor, ate pig, and then he died because he had a bug bacteria, and they're like, oh, God doesn't want you to eat pig because Tom the pig eater fucking died last week. Same thing with shellfish. They probably saw some dickhead with a fucking allergic reaction to shellfish, and they're like, oh, fucking Ted died from shellfish. God doesn't want you to eat shellfish. So from there, if I was to extrapolate that logic in codification morality like over time, I think there's like social observations that we made as a species, like telling the truth is better than lying. Killing should only be done in justified circumstances. Fucking your neighbor's wife is a really good way to get yourself killed. If you want to know who your kids are, you should probably be faithful to your partner. If you don't want your dick to rot off because of diseases, then you should probably be faithful to your partner. If you want your kids to be happy and healthy and productive human beings, then you should be around for them and raise them and teach them to be moral in the ways that you believe morality are important. And, nihilist anti-theists I get so frustrated with because they don't even concede that this like morality is evolutionarily advantageous. They just say, oh, even to have social prescriptions is bigoted. Even to have social prescriptions is fucked up. Whereas for me, it's obvious that a lot of these social prescriptions actually do lead to better human life on average. And you can come to me with 1,000 exceptions, but the reality is that these rules were put in place for a reason. So for me, I'm appealing to Christianity. You were saying that you weren't appealing from a utilitarian standpoint. I am appealing from a utilitarian standpoint. I don't literally believe in the resurrection of Christ because I have 10,000 logical lab coat fucking reasons to not, but I do believe in the moral utility of Christian beliefs because I see their impact on human beings.
Yeah, and that's what I'm saying is that's where I think we diverge. Is I'm not pushing it for you. And here's my issue though with the utilitarian is, and this is really the crux of it. I think that you cannot get the fruits of the religion without believing it. I think that that's really the fundamental misstep of the Nietzscheans and the new pagans and even people that say they're cultural Christians, because I hear this a lot. I hear people say, Christian civilization produced all this. Let's sort of act out Christianity without believing in it. And I think that there is something that changes when something is done self-consciously. There is, and I think maybe you would agree with this, that if I really believe that the Bible is the inspired word of God, if I really believe that I'm going to burn in hell if I sin and I'll be rewarded if I don't, I really believe that will be my destiny. Maybe not as my body, but my soul, my eternal soul. There's a huge difference between earnest, sincere faith and a sort of self-conscious performance of faith for the sake of these kinds of benefits, essentially. And that, I think that's the real problem, which has been unresolved, is there isn't anything else. There's no alternative to believe in. And I think that trying to simulate that belief, I also think that you don't get the benefits, because again, it really only works if people believe that there's a consequence for it. I think it really only works if people, and also because it's true. It's not because people are not eating pork or whatever that they're doing great. They're doing good because they're doing the right thing. And I also think that it's no coincidence that things that God prescribes are good for you. I think that, when you look at the Bible, one way to look at it is like, this is just this collected tradition. And there's a so-called Burkean way to look at it. There's like a Burkean heuristic where you say, like you said, oh, people aren't eating shellfish, so they put it in the religious text and something like this. But I think that it's no coincidence that it's not even just about like STDs and like and how to build a functioning society. I also think it's about how to live a fulfilling life. I think it's how to navigate. Like, it's not, in other words, it's not just good in purely material terms, like in things that ancient people would understand. It's good in terms of, like, when you read the wisdom books, it's not just about like solving your little problems. It's about how are you going to live like a life that's really consistent with what you were kind of created to get. And it's written, in other words, like an author's manual, not like a field manual, if that makes sense. It's written like the owner wrote the manual, rather than we're sort of like figuring these things out. Because there's a lot of stuff in the Bible that is, in my opinion, maybe counterintuitive, but it's true. And there's a lot of things in the canon of Catholicism where you might say, well, there's not actually a really simple evolutionary psychology explanation for it, but yet it works and it's true. And so to me, that shows, and then you've got, of course, the prophecies. The prophecies are an unignorable part of this. How could the prophecies predict the crucifixion? How could the prophecies predict the time and the manner and the nature of the coming of the Messiah if it was just supposed to be this field manual of collected wisdom? And why would there be this sort of arcane, esoteric things in there, numbers and all this, 7 times 70? I think it's clear that it's a transcendental, otherworldly owner's manual, essentially, as opposed to this. I think that the evolutionary psychology thing just I think it's insufficient. Exactly. Yeah, that's exactly right.
Yeah, I land in between these two, and I joke about it. I joke about it with plenty of people, but I think that I think you're gonna hate this, but I'm gonna tell you anyways. I think like contemplating the nature of existence and marijuana or mushrooms or any of that kind of stuff, it fucks with you on a level that's ultimately undeniable. And the thoughts and revelations that you'll achieve when you kind of get into these spaces are undeniable because they alter your pattern of behavior. And so that's where, for me, I think that contemplation, meditation, seeking, God, like I said, I'm a Gnostic, not a specific religious person. I just believe in a fundamental creative force and an order to the universe. And I think that you can know that universe through revelation that's both like personal and also cultural and over time and all that kind of stuff. So I do think that the Bible is revelation, but I also think that it's revelation through a flawed filter, and that filter is humanity. And so for me, everything that we're scratching at, whether it's Taoism or Confucianism or Christianity or Islam or something like that, we're all scratching at the same thing, which is God and existence and morality and meaning and all that kind of stuff. And it's the flawed translations. It's us dancing on the face of God. It's us trying to scratch at the logos to understand it. But I don't think that we have a final answer yet. I don't think that the Bible, that's it. That's all that we can understand about God in the universe. I don't believe that. Maybe that's very lab coated of me to do so, but I do want to share something with you as well. So I didn't believe that dinosaurs existed or make sense. Okay, they're too fucking big. All right, and basically they don't. Them fucking doesn't make sense, right? They're like, how does a stegosaurus fuck? The two things have like plates on their backs.
We talked about this last week with Wang Lin, by the way, just out of the blue. You happen to bring this up,
and then I got a bird. And the way that birds have sex is they basically rub their buttholes together. So all they do is they lift up their feathers and they rub their buttholes together. And I was like, oh, okay, maybe a T-Rex could do this. Maybe a Stegosaurus could do this. So I just want you to throw that in the back of your head in case the dinosaurs aren't real fucking thing is still in the back of your head. I think dinosaur sex is possible.
I don't know if they're real. That's the thing. I don't know. I've
Have
never
you
said
seen the fossil records? I haven't seen them.
I find it hard to believe. Listen, here's the thing. I've argued with people about this my entire life. Here's the difference. Lab coats are out there saying T-Rex, yeah, sure. Sauropod or sauropod, yeah, totally. And a guy comes along and says, hey guys, I don't know about all that. It just seems hard to believe. And they go, crucify him. He doesn't believe in the giant lizards. Like, all I said is I find it a little bit hard to believe. I find evolution. I'm a paleoconservative, not a paleontologist. So I don't know the fossil record here.
Listen,
but it just
I
I'm
think
skeptical.
Okay, my running theory was that dinosaurs were they were created to sell children's toys. Okay, they were like, let's make cool looking weird animals.
Just came up with dinosaurs,
and then we'll sell them to kids. And then when fucking ultra giga chad fucking Christian nationalist geniuses figure out that we're lying, we'll just fucking browbeat them into shutting their mouths about the existence of dinosaurs. I think that's what happened.
Possible. Well, then there's a big I don't even know what the conspiracy theory is, but it says like oil people created the fossil myth. I don't know. I'm not really up to date on that one. But why does everyone care that I believe in that's I have a problem with this snarky.
No, I was saying that I had similar doubts, and then I saw birds fuck, and I was like, okay, maybe dinosaurs are real. That's all
I think it's possible. I think that the Bible describes dinosaurs. I think that the Bible.
Oh, for sure. I think historical descriptions of dragons and sea monsters and all that kind of shit were probably like Leviathan creatures in human prehistory that were absolutely fucking monstrous to deal with. We probably we think it's all fucking fun and games to deal with like mountain lions and grizzly bears and all that kind of shit. Could you imagine like actually dealing with a fucking squid that's capable of killing people, or fucking like a goddamn imagine dealing with a a Komodo dragon, like that's like full sized, and then walking away and being like, Frank got eaten by a Komodo dragon, and it's like, go write a story about that shit. Tell me that dinosaurs or dragons don't pop up in your lore, in your literature. But anyways, I'm okay. So I'm not gonna lie. I'm gonna tell you exactly where I'm at. I don't give a fuck about Ukraine because I understand. Like, I give a fuck on a personal level. I'm still gonna send money to my friends in Ukraine. I'm still gonna support them. And
what about the Azov Battalion? We didn't even
listen.
Yeah,
he's a
Azov
based Christian Western Ukrainian. He asked me for dating advice that he followed well before the war, and he actually took me up on it. And he actually had a successful chaste date with a girl that he was into. So he's a good kid. Anyways. Sorry, did you have a real question about the Azov Battalion? Sorry,
no,
Ethan freaked out a little bit.
Mentioned that we hadn't brought it up. I was just being silly.
Okay,
It's silly. We haven't brought it up, but
wait, why do Christian nationalists who hang out with fascists care about Ukrainian fascists as a moral fucking indictment of Ukraine? That's my question.
I don't at all.
Yeah.
Okay.
Everybody's always using that argument. They're like,
Azov's a bunch of Nazis. It's like, don't you like Nazis, you dumb fuck?
Well, I will say, here's what I will say. The Ukrainian far right, they hate ethnic Russians. And for what it's worth, I am against ethnic hatred. I'm not going to say that I support the war by Russia because they're exterminating racism. I'm not going to say that. But I will say that the ethnic hatred of the Russians is wrong. I don't support ethnic hatred. And for what it's worth, it is fucked up what they're doing. The Galician far right and the Kiev government going after the Russian language and all of that. I think it's messed up, but but I also don't really care about that.
The Azov thing is also, people bring up the way they are treated by the Western media and Western governments previous to this conflict,
where they're called out before and now they're just virtually ignored because as long as they're fighting Russia, who gives a fuck?
basically. I won't say ignored, but kind of whitewash a little bit. It's not like they completely ignore it, but they kind of give it a little bit of a pass now.
Which you find ironic considering like the global homo internationalist, pro LGBT, pro integrationist.
The moderator. Some people say, I don't know. I won't weigh in how I feel one way or the other. But people have certainly brought that up. Yeah.
Yeah. So okay. So what I'll tell you is, I don't need to wrap up. I can be here as long as you want to. If you want to answer super chats or continue on to a different conversation or whatever. I'm just telling you. I'm old as shit. I'm still in the wage cage, so I have to pay my bills. So I sat in a chair for 8 hours before doing this debate, and my neck and my back is fucking screaming at me because I can't do this shit full time, unlike you neat fucks. And basically, I want to get there eventually, but I'm not there right now. So maybe next time I can be a little bit more hydrated and well rested. But my brain, my early onset dementia is going to start to wander. Yeah. So you kind of we got to move into super chats or pick a topic or something.
No, it's cool. We got a few here. I mean we did a couple hours. It was I said Spacey earlier. It covered. It was a wide ranging. Somebody said more of an interview. I saw a couple people. We kind of more of a discussion, I would say, and feeling out some areas here. Let's see. Counterpoints. Clean up that mouth. The fact that you curse after every word you say makes you unbearable to listen to. It makes you sound like you don't know what you're talking about. Now I do curse a little bit myself.
I was about to say, tell that super chat. Yeah, no, hold on, Ethan. I want an opportunity to respond. I'm a former Marine. Number 2, eat a dick. Number 3, you're on the far right. We're literally talking about like Christian imperium and conquering the world and what elements of fucking fascism are integratable and which ones of them are fucking cringe. And you're complaining about the word like fuck. Are you a baby? Are you a child? Get the fuck out of here.
I will say it is a crutch, though. I realize that I'm on my own, and it's like
I'm halfway through life. I will die with this crutch.
Look, I mean, I'm still gonna curse. Don't get me wrong, but I do recognize there are better words. Santa Claus says Counterpoints denies Jesus as our Lord and Savior. I don't know. And then he said something about I won't repeat the rest. It was kind of
if it's TOS safe, go ahead. I'll just fight chat for your amusement.
I'd rather not. Something about burning on coal for eternity. So I don't know.
Is that like a racist sex joke or is that a hell joke? I can't tell.
I mean, if you want me to read it, I'll read it. He says, "Is the gay apron worth burning on coal for eternity?"
Gay apron.
I don't know what that means.
We'll catch up with them eventually. Somebody can explain it to me later.
The apron, I'm not sure. So let's see. Connor, you talk about how Russia didn't try to negotiate, but they did. And Zelensky wouldn't even deny NATO. With Russian security at risk over something so small, then yes, shelling cities is necessary.
So pushing back on that, do you think I just as easily could have gone back to Nick and bored the fuck out of y'all by saying Ukraine tried to negotiate too? Back in 2014, there was this meeting between Zelensky and Russia, and they asked for these 3 things, and they didn't get them. I don't give a shit. We're talking about broad strokes.
All right, now do you want to weigh in on that, Nick? Anything to say there? Or?
I would just say that it's pretty transparent that we try to negotiate. I don't think that Russia tried to negotiate. I don't think anybody even denies that. I think that basically the diplomatic expansion, the NATO expansion, was a steamroll from the very beginning. I don't think anybody denies that. I just think where people would argue about that is they'd say like, well, it doesn't matter because liberal democracy is what's right. So it's almost like this.
What do you think about the idea that Putin was actually doing this also for the future, not just for this Ukrainian dispute, that this is also to show the West that he will do something like that, that Russia will go to war. And it's not just all saber rattling that, yeah, we will go into country. Yeah, we will drop some missiles.
I think he's cementing his legacy. The dude's at his like 60s or something like that. He's trying to make sure that Russia is stronger than when he first got it. I don't know if that's true or not, considering how like economically fucked and militarily fucked it's been, but that was his goal. Whether or not he achieved it is debatable.
Well, yeah. Well, maybe he thinks if they don't ever act, if they just keep getting bullied by the West over and over and over again, and they never step basically in a serious way,
Yeah,
militarily.
but there's just, while we can extrapolate it out into these broad moral philosophies and all that kind of stuff, there's young people who are dead now that didn't need to be. That's it. So.
Well, I mean, that's always the case though throughout world history, right? I mean, there's always wars and people dead that shouldn't be dead. In theory, right? In theory, you wouldn't want to see anybody get killed, but
my only objection to any pushback on this is basically I want you to look at it. That's it. I don't care. If you want to say Russia is based and we salute our boys in white, red, and fucking blue or some shit, if you want to say that shit, I just want you to also look at the pictures of Ukrainian kids with half their fucking heads missing. Because, oh no, the dead people, Nick, the dead people. Yes, I'm appealing to the dead people.
But a picture of a dead person. You have this argument, but it's a war.
Yeah.
And also a lot of that is fake.
You could have left it with the first one.
It's also fake. Do you not believe in atrocity propaganda? Do you not?
No, I do believe in atrocity propaganda, but do you? So for atrocity propaganda, there's probably some level of atrocity, right? Even if we're talking about a few thousand or a few hundred or whatever, those people are dead.
No, I think that you have
if you shoot an artillery shell into a civilian area, there's a chance it's going to hit a civilian.
Well, there will be civilian casualties, but this, what we're hearing from the media is hysterical, where they say. They're bombing maternity wards deliberately. It's like they're bombing a puppy mill. They just blew up a puppy mill and a pet store and a daycare. It's like that's the atrocity, because it's, of course, like atrocity to me implies excessive cruelty or malice. It is a war. There will be casualties, and that is unfortunate. But to play it up like it's
so this is what I'm really saying, because I don't think we're disagreeing. I just want you to look at it. That's it. That's all I care about. If you have the same opinion, you have the same opinion. I don't care.
Look at that.
Okay. All right, fine. Then I don't give a fuck. That's fine. Just as long, and I'm not saying this is like a personal indictment to you. I'm saying to the people who are blasé about violence, I would like it if they had some real world experience with violence so they know what it feels like. And then if they could look at the violence that's being inflicted in an ideology that they supposedly support, and then if they can morally square that with themselves, it's like somebody eating a cow or some shit. Like if you're going to go to McDonald's or something like that, I'm not saying you got to fucking kill your own cows and shit, but recognize that you're killing a fucking cow. And if it came down to it and you're like, yeah, I want my fucking Big Mac, then just be willing to shoot the cow in the fucking head yourself. That's all I'm saying.
I just think that, like, I agree with you. I think that people should not be blasé about war and violence because, and you uniquely understand this because you were in a war. You're right. Violence is abhorrent and war is abhorrent. And I think that war should be avoided at any cost. And I don't think there's any, I don't think it's good to be glib about violence. That being said, I think that it's foundational to the worldview that the violence is unnecessary and the violence is being caused. I mean, it's true that Russia, in a strict sense, initiated it, but the real cause was the West, and it is tragic and it's unfortunate. I'm not trying to be funny when I say that, but I do support Russia and I do support it in the metapolitical consequences. But I agree with you. I don't think violence is funny. It is tragic where it happens, but that is the world.
But
and these are things that happen.
We don't have to be so sober. Violence can be funny, and death can be funny. But like, I just want people to reconcile what they're doing. So for instance, like Coach Red Pill as a fucking example or whatever. See, I knew you would enjoy that. Traveling to a country that's being invaded, publicly supporting the invaders, and then posting that to social media, and then getting detained for a few weeks. I don't know the details of it or whatever, but the fucking, like, the Rip Bozo shit on fucking Twitter, I'm not gonna lie. It's like, if he was actually executed in like a, Ukrainian fucking jail cell or whatever, it'd be a little fucked up. I laughed. Okay? I laughed. I thought it was fucking funny. I thought it was fucking funny that somebody was mean to you, and you're like, fuck you, you piece of shit. And, violence can be funny sometimes.
I agree.
Yeah, so my only point is, like, I just want people who are casual and blasé about violence to know what they're being casual and blasé about it. If you want to be funny, if you want to fuck around with it, yeah, sure, go ahead. Just do it like a fucking adult. That's all I need.
Fair.
Yeah. Okay, all right. Now I have my own take. I was about to say something. All right, now let me make sure I didn't miss all the questions. Let's see. Ask Connor why he thinks black people love their families more than white people love their families. I don't know if that's a take that you have or
It's not a take that I have.
okay. Internax says, "Wow, my old best friend and my new best friend are getting along. Glad to see that you're becoming a groper like me, Connor."
Nick, do you know who Enderdax is by any chance?
Yeah, I have seen him around, but I don't really know his story. I don't know his deal.
He's a Christian Democrat, and he basically like he's not as built into this universe as I am, I guess. But he deals with degenerate Twitch trash and then freaks the fuck out and autistically spurgs at him without getting banned.
I know. Let's see.
Good friend.
Anonymous says, so based on this debate, Connor agrees with Nick on Russia's justification of this war. What do you say about that?
So I can concede descriptive reality. There's no harm in conceding descriptive reality, but I also think that Nick would probably concede my descriptive reality, which is the United States is representative of a 65 trillion global hegemon that's trying to rule the world either through diplomacy or economics, in that there is a argument for Russia being forced into the fold. It didn't happen. There's a consequence. And you could say it was like an overreach or some shit, but it's not Europeans. Europeans are experiencing high gas prices. They're not getting artillery shelled. And Americans, like there's global economic earthquakes because of what's going on. But it's not Europeans or the Western hegemony that's paying the price. It's Ukrainians and it's Russians. So while I think Nick could be right that this is an overreach by the global American empire, I think the reason why they were willing to overreach is because they knew they weren't going to be the ones who primarily paid the price. So you can morally indict my side while still descriptively understanding their project. So just because I concede to descriptive reality doesn't mean I'm like, oh yeah, Russia's based for fucking artillery shelling fucking cities. No.
I would go a step further, and I would even say that the United States is driving the policy, and the United States isn't even bearing the brunt of the economic pain, too.
Mm-hmm.
It's like we're not dying, and also we're not reliant on the Russian natural gas, but we're the driver. This policy is not good for Ukraine or for Germany or France or Eastern Europe. So, yeah.
But maybe Joe Biden is playing 4D chess because Trump was trying to get the German military to carry its own weight, and because of the war in Ukraine, the Bundeswehr is now rearming and becoming, better funded. So maybe Biden is actually, despite his melting brain, a 4D genius.
Yeah, maybe. Possible. Well, he's about to end abortion. Only Catholic president since the 60s, he ended abortion.
We never saw it coming.
I kind of like it. He ended abortion. Taliban won in Afghanistan. Like, I'm kind of loving what we're getting, honestly.
Now let's see here.
Fucking savage.
A couple more super chats. Let's see. Unrelated to this debate, but according to Julius Evola, the masculine spirit takes form in warrior or priest. People telling Nick to work out don't get that they are imposing warrior case values on a man who walks a priestly path.
True. Yeah, this guy's a warrior. He's a former Marine. I don't know if you caught that. He's a former Marine. Or you never leave. What does he never leave the Marine Corps or something like that?
Yeah, once a Marine, always a Marine. Yeah, and that's why I have fucking arthritis and neck problems and shit. Wasn't Evola the fucking autist who was like walking around in artillery strikes during World War I and got paralyzed as a result? Or was I thinking of some other philosopher?
I don't know his story. I don't believe he was in World War I. No.
Okay. There was some dissident right-wing philosopher or somebody people like to appeal to who literally was like, the acts of God and the acts of man are and they align this way mystically, this, that, the other. And he used to go out for like walks in artillery strikes in a civilian area, and he literally got paralyzed because he was such an autist. So
I haven't heard that one.
Just be careful with Central Europeans giving you advice about how to live a masculine life. That's what I would say.
In chat said yes, but World War II, no. Not World War One.
Okay, good.
No, I didn't know that either. Let's see. Mr. Gibson says, "Counter does signing your life onto Zog make you feel like you have an important take? Being a Marine doesn't hide you from real criticism. You started off good, but ended up shooting yourself in the foot. This isn't.
I'd be curious about what he thought I shot myself in the foot in. And no, I don't hide behind my service to make my own opinions. I make my own opinions. So
Let's see. I'm trying to make sure to miss any. I think we got them all in here. And like I said, it ended up being a little bit more of a discussion with some flourishes of debate here and there. Now you started off counterpoint, so I'll let you start off here and let Mr. Fuentes finish it here. And I know your back's hurting too, probably, so I appreciate you hanging in here.
I appreciate you allowing me to be a boomer on your platform.
Nope.
I had fun. I enjoyed it. Nick the Knife Fuentes is a feared name in the world, but unfortunately he's been castigated into his realm. But I do want to make it clear that we do have opposing projects. Just because I'm conciliatory or concede to descriptive reality or this, that, the other, we do have fundamentally different perspectives. To articulate this in the closing, because I'm not religious, because I don't root my world in foundational Christianity, I do have different takes on gay folk, trans folk, minorities, all this kind of shit. And I'm trying to think of the future of the world in which we build a civic nationalist, liberalist structure that actually is strong enough to survive the trials and tribulations of the future without it being like a desiccated, morally bankrupt, spiritually collapsing, falling apart, because we're at the peak of Rome, but what happens now? Does it perpetuate or does it collapse? And if it's going to perpetuate, we're going to need a spiritual, not like religious necessarily, but we're going to need a spiritual narrative that actually propagates the project forward. Without that narrative, we're doomed to collapse because people don't even know what they're fighting and dying for. So the material benefits are obvious. The global hegemonic project is powerful. Just because it experienced a temporary setback, I want people in Nick's audience to soberly reflect on what the geopolitical goals of Russia are and what the geopolitical goals of the American hegemonic project are and who's succeeding in their goals more at this time. And if anything, my argument against Nick's view, like this prescription that it's all going to fall apart, Cato, again, like the Roman historian philosopher or whatever, he predicted the fall of Rome 350, 400 years before it happened. So you can see the writing on the wall, but it could take longer to happen than you give it time for. And on top of that, who do you want to be? So do you want to be the Christian aesthetic who ignores the fall of the Imperium and eventually wants to reconstitute something greater within Christendom? Because there were people who existed 2,000 years ago who did exactly that. There were Bulgarian Central Europeans who became more Roman than some of the Romans themselves and fought for the Imperium and perpetuated the empire for longer than most people thought it was going to survive. And then there was stuck-up, snobby, shitty Italian Romans who basically doomed the empire through their own hubris and through their own discrimination of what they had created, that they basically rushed the fall of the empire because they were snobby and shitty towards their own creation. So I'm hoping that through these conversations, through these ideas, we could kind of come along like a civic nationalist, liberal social structure that's capable of perpetuating. And when Nick says, do you think it's strong enough to survive? My honest answer is, I don't know. It's just what I'm pushing for, the same way that he's pushing for Tsar Nicholas XIV and the revitalized Christian empire of the 3500s. So we'll see whose project survives the test of history.
Mr. Fuentes, go ahead, sir.
Indeed. Yes. Well, what started out as a debate about Russia and Ukraine has really taken some wild twists and some winding twists and turns, but that's okay. I thought it was fun. I thought it was a good conversation. And I think you hit the nail on the head. The crux of the real divergence is on religion. And I think that is true about you and I and Destiny and I. I don't even think it's so much about right or left or, anything really specific about ideology. It's about whether or not we're religious. That's obviously the big difference. And as far as the Russia-Ukraine conflict goes, I think if I could just give an opinion on that, I think it's NATO's fault. I think Russia is awesome. I support Russia. I think that the decline of American, and here's the thing about American hegemony, it's over regardless. The unipolar moment has passed. The Ukraine war is not the beginning of it. It's sort of the end of that transition. And so whether we pass good policy or bad policy really doesn't matter. China is coming back. Russia is coming back. Europe will probably break away in more meaningful ways as time goes on. This is a reality we have to deal with. And so we can't have a foreign policy predicated on this infallibility, this self-righteousness, and also this idea that we can achieve any goal, and we don't have to select which goals we want to have. We've got to make choices and be economical, as opposed to this idea that we can fight 2 wars at once and do whatever we want and we're never wrong. I think the Ukraine war shows that. As for our competing and separate projects, I think that you are with everyone else. You, in a certain sense, you are with the Nietzscheans and the Baptists and with everybody else that is trying to create some kind of new religion or something like a religion in the wake of modernism. And I think that it's just not going to work. And it's not going to work because religion is true. If religion were not true, it would be possible. But it just so happens that because religion is true, this project is impossible. It's probably not going to work. It's not going to work. And it's been tried in communism. It's been tried in liberalism. I mean, and how many times do we have to see these kind of violent revolutions and butchery in France or in Russia or in Iran or in other places or in Germany, even before we realize that there are no idea systems, there are no systems that are going to solve the problem, which is that man has fallen, and that we live in a hierarchical, supernatural, metaphysical universe where there are angels and demons, or rather there are angelic beings, and where there's a God. I think that all these systems failings is a testament to the fact that it's not getting at the true nature of the universe and of man. And so I think that's why the only thing that will work is going to be Christianity, and it's only going to work because it's the only thing that's true. And if we're living in the end times, it's not going to work. If we're not living in the end times, maybe we'll get another century or two. But that's my closing statement. That's all I got.
Thank you, both you gentlemen, for coming on the Kill Stream tonight. Another one in the books. Wide-ranging discussion / debate here tonight on the show. I enjoyed it as well. Counterpoints, Nicholas J. Fuentes. Welcome back, both of you, hopefully down the line, and have a good one this weekend.
All right. Appreciate y'all.
All right.
Have a great one.
Thanks a lot, you too.